Have you ever stopped to consider what led the world to descend into the chaos that was World War I? A war that was of such magnitude it spanned across continents, involving nations far and wide. A war that wasn't sparked by a single event, but a convoluted mesh of happenings. A war, the causes of which were as complex as they were numerous. Unraveling the reasons behind World War I is like untangling a complex web of events, alliances, and tensions. To understand World War I, we need to go back to the beginning, to the sparks that ignited the fire. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in June of 1914 is often pinpointed as the initial spark. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was assassinated in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. This assassination set off a chain of events, eventually leading the world into war. Yet, this incident alone did not cause World War I. It was more like the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, set against a backdrop of rising tensions and conflicts of interest among Europe's great powers. An intricate system of alliances played a significant role. On one side you had the Triple Entente, an alliance between Russia, France, and the United Kingdom. On the other side, you had the Central Powers, primarily Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These alliances were intended to promote peace. Ironically, they did the opposite. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the domino effect began. Russia, bound by treaty to Serbia, declared war on Austria-Hungary. Germany, allied to Austria-Hungary, saw this as an act of war against its own empire. And so, the chains of alliances dragged one country after another into the conflict. Another underpinning factor was the rising tide of nationalism, particularly in the Balkans. There was a growing desire among these ethnic groups to have nations of their own, leading to unrest and sporadic violence. Europe was also caught in an arms race. The spirit of militarism was sweeping across the continent. Countries were expanding their armies and navies, building up arsenals in anticipation of the conflict to come. This militaristic mindset, coupled with the aforementioned factors, created a powder keg ready to explode at the slightest provocation. These were the sparks that ignited the fire, setting the stage for the world's first global conflict. As the war unfolded, it was clear that this was unlike any conflict the world had ever seen. In the trenches, soldiers faced a new kind of warfare. Trench warfare was a battle of attrition, a war of waiting and watching where soldiers lived in squalid conditions, often knee-deep in mud with lice and rats, their constant companions. The monotony of the waiting was broken by terrifying moments of combat. The soldiers were ordered over the top, climbing out of the safety of their trenches to charge into a barrage of machine gun fire and artillery. The ground between enemy lines, aptly named No Man's Land, was a deadly expanse littered with barbed wire and landmines. Yet, the war was not only fought in the trenches. The advent of new technologies changed the face of warfare. The machine gun, the tank, and chemical weapons were introduced, each bringing its own brand of horror. The machine gun mowed down rows of soldiers, the tank crushed everything in its path, and chemical weapons like mustard gas choked and burned the soldiers, creating wounds that could never truly heal. The war also saw the introduction of strategic bombing, with Zeppelins and later airplanes dropping bombs on civilian and military targets alike. The sky was no longer a safe haven, it had become another battlefield. The cost of this war was immense. Millions of lives were lost and millions more were irrevocably changed. Young men full of hope and dreams were sent off to fight, only to return home broken, if they returned at all. The war touched every corner of the globe, affecting every nation, every family, every individual. Even the land bore the scars of the war. Once fertile fields were transformed into barren wastelands, forests were reduced to splintered stumps, and beautiful cities were reduced to rubble. World War I was a brutal, unrelenting conflict, leaving no nation untouched by its horrors. The war was more than just a historical event. It left a profound impact that still resonates today. With the conclusion of World War I, we saw sweeping changes across the globe, socially, politically, and economically. Socially, the war brought about a seismic shift in the world's perspective. It exposed the harsh reality of trench warfare, chemical weapons, and the high cost of human life. This led to a widespread disillusionment among people, a trend that was reflected in the arts and literature of the time. A lost generation emerged, grappling with the horrors they had witnessed and the void left by the loss of millions. Politically, the map of Europe was redrawn. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, led to the dissolution of empires and the creation of new nation-states. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires crumbled, giving birth to countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. But the punitive measures imposed on Germany, including hefty war reparations and territorial losses, fostered resentment and laid the groundwork for future conflicts. Economically, the war devastated nations. European countries, once global powerhouses, were left in ruins. The cost of war was astronomical, and the debt incurred led to a significant economic downturn. The United States emerged as a leading global economic power, having loaned substantial amounts to the Allies during the war. There's no denying that World War I was a turning point in history. It marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. It introduced new technologies, redefined warfare, and led to significant societal and political changes. But it also left a legacy of loss, devastation, and a deep-seated bitterness that would eventually lead to another world war. In the wake of World War I, the world was forever changed, and the seeds of future conflicts were sown. As we reflect on this monumental event, we are reminded of the true cost of war and the importance of striving for peace. Reflecting on World War I is a sobering reminder of the devastating costs of the global conflict. As we delve into the depths of history, we encounter a world forever changed by a war that spanned continents, took millions of lives, and scarred the face of humanity. This war, known as the Great War, brought forth lessons that resonate even today, over a century later. It showed us the dangers of unchecked nationalism, the perils of tangled alliances, and the horrifying potential of technological advancement when wielded in the name of destruction. And yet from the ashes of this terrible conflict, we also learned the importance of diplomacy. The Treaty of Versailles, for all its flaws, represented an era-defining attempt to resolve international disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. It highlighted the need for a global conversation, for nations to sit at the same table, to listen, to understand, to compromise. World War I demonstrated the necessity of collective security. The League of Nations, formed in its aftermath, was a beacon of hope for a world weary of war. Despite its eventual failure, it laid the groundwork for the United Nations, a body that continues to strive for global peace and cooperation. The aftermath of the war also saw the rise of pacifism, a movement that championed peace above all else. The horrors witnessed during the war led many to reject violence and champion peaceful resolutions. This sentiment continues to inspire movements around the world today, reminding us that peace is not just a dream, but a goal worth striving for. As we reflect on World War I, we must remember the lives lost, the families torn apart, the countries devastated. We remember not to dwell in the past, but to learn from it, to understand the true cost of war, and to commit ourselves to the pursuit of peace. World War I stands as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict and the priceless value of peace. Let its lessons serve as a guide, a beacon illuminating the path to a future where diplomacy triumphs over war and peace is more than just a distant aspiration. As we look back on World War I, we see a complex web of causes, a brutal conflict, and a world forever changed. The war ignited like a tinderbox, fueled by a tangle of alliances, rivalries, and a shot fired in Sarajevo. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary set the world ablaze, and nations were drawn into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. As the war unfolded, it became a grim testament to the destructive power of modern warfare. Trenches stretched across the European landscape, and the air echoed with the clamor of shells and gunfire. The war claimed millions of lives, both military and civilian, and left scars on the face of the earth and the psyche of nations. World War I had profound and far-reaching impacts. It redrew the world map, toppling empires and giving birth to new nations. It reshaped societies, economies, and cultures, and ushered in an era of technological advancement and social change. The war's aftermath also sowed the seeds of future conflicts, with the punitive Treaty of Versailles laying the groundwork for the rise of fascism in World War II. In essence, World War I was a crucible of the 20th century. It marked a decisive break from the past and set the stage for the tumultuous decades that followed. World War I was a defining moment in history, and understanding it helps us appreciate the world we live in today.